there, welcome to A Mirror Darkly Unbridled Inquiry. Today we're going to be talking about individualism versus collectivism in society. And this is Robin, I'm Ruth, and we do the show in 10-minute segments. So if you have a comment or a question, please put it in the comments, and it'll get read at the end of each 10-minute segment. If nobody says anything, we just keep moving. So please participate. If you think of a show idea while we're talking, please suggest that so that we have more show topics. Seems like the webcam is like really high up, so our chins are there we go. Our chins were sitting on the on the banner. So anyway, so we're going to get started with that. We have a new listener today, and then we have a couple of returning guests. So we're glad to see you guys. So please participate. So go ahead, hon, take it away.
Okay. Well, individualist versus collectivist understandings of society is the topic for today. And the first thing to understand is that that's on a continuum. That is, it's not binary. That is, individualistic societies, collectivist societies, you still have a mixture of things. It's just that one side is more dominant than the other. Individualistic culture obviously is a society where it's characterized by individualism, in which the prioritization or emphasis of the individual is supreme over the group. Individualistic cultures are oriented around the self, being independent instead of identifying with a group mentality. They see each other only loosely linked and value personal goals over group interests. Individualistic cultures tend to have a more diverse population and are characterized with an emphasis on personal achievements and a rational assessment of both the beneficial and detrimental aspects of relationships with others. Individualistic cultures have such unique aspects of communication as being low power distance cultures, and they also have a low context communication style.
And what does that mean?
A low context communication style means that you don't have to understand a lot of details about the culture to be able to make sense of things. For instance, bringing in Star Trek into this, in The Next Generation, you have this one incident where Captain Picard and the captain of the alien spaceship beam down to a planet because these two cultures have not been able to communicate with each other. That is, the Federation's universal translator can take the communication from this culture, translate it into, say, English, and you can understand the individual words, but it still makes absolutely no sense.
Okay.
Because this particular culture apparently was very collectivistic, and everything they said referenced something literary or some aspect of their culture or something in their history, so that you had no clue what in the world it was referring to because you didn't have that background. Okay. So you knew the words, but you didn't know what the stories being referenced referred to. It's like if I said, "Where's the beef?" and you're not familiar with the 1980s Wendy's commercials and its use in the political campaign from that year, to understand the full significance of what the phrase means. Or if I say, I am
so
your father, Luke,
in,
or whatever.
Right, in a collectivist society, you have to have the collective knowledge.
You have to have the collective knowledge in order to fully communicate.
Now, there's a
lot of things will be missed.
Okay,
the other thing is the power distance culture. That means collectivist societies are much more highly structured hierarchically. That is, you have to find where you fit into that civilization or in that society, and then your communication up and down is different than your communication side to side. Okay. Now, an extreme version of this is in Japan, where they have a whole set of pronouns that are reserved for use to the emperor and his family. That is, the only time you use those pronouns is if you're addressing the emperor. That's a little bit odd. Sumerian civilization was a little bit weird in that regard, too. You have Eme Gal and Eme Sol as two versions of the language, and there's controversy as to exactly what the significance is between the two, but one seems to be men's language, the other is women's language. So they could talk to each other, but they had their own internal wording for certain things. What?
Oh, a new listener just asked what does he need to do for the show, and I just am telling him. So, Joe, all you need to do, just listen, and if you have any questions, like I'm asking him questions. That's kind of what everybody does. Ask questions about the topic.
Because we have a discussion.
Right. This is a discussion format. It just is a little weird because you guys have to write it in. I get to actually talk.
Yes.
But so that's kind of what we do. You listen and participate in the discussion if you want to. If you don't have anything to say, you don't want to participate, that's fine. You can just listen. So it's up to you. But this is about asking questions and about learning new things and kind of expanding our understanding of the world and history and all different topics. So anyway, so okay, so like in Collectivist, now our society is very individualist.
Yes, Western civilization, at least the English-speaking peoples, tend to be very individualistic in their orientation, more so even than the rest of Europe. So we're on the extreme end of individualism. Other cultures are more collectivistic and have more of that as part of their society. One of the things that's interesting, Max Weber in 1930 contrasted collectivism and individualism through the lens of religion, believing that Protestants were more individualistic and self-reliant compared to Catholics who endorsed hierarchical and interdependent relationships among people. I should probably explain what collectivism is, too. It's a value that is characterized by emphasis on cohesiveness among individuals and prioritization of the group over the self. Individuals or groups that subscribe to collectivist worldview tend to find common values and goals as particularly useful and demonstrate greater orientation toward in-group than toward the out-group. The in-group is thought to be more diffusely defined for collectivist individuals to include societal units ranging from nuclear family to religious groups or to racial ethnic groups. And so Weber thought that one of the differences that's discernible between Catholic societies versus Protestant societies is Protestant societies are more individualistic, while Catholic societies are more hierarchical and collectivist in their orientation. Now, a funny thing in that regard, Umberto Eco, who is, or was, he recently died like in the last 5 years, he was a novelist. He was also a medieval, specialist in medieval history and literature. And he, just a minute here, he was born in 1932, died in 2016. You may know him as the author of The Name of the Rose. It was made into a movie. Had Sean Connery in it.
Oh, it's a movie I need to see then.
It's a good movie, actually. It's a medieval mystery. It's a murder mystery.
The Name of the Rose?
The Name of the Rose.
Okay.
But anyway, he wrote they're really good books. But anyway, a while back, 1994, he contributed an article to the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, which I subscribe to. And one of the things, and what he was doing in the article, is he was talking about operating systems and comparing them to Protestants versus Catholics.
Interesting.
And so this is what he wrote. Fact is that the world is divided between users of the Macintosh computer and users of the MS-DOS compatible computers. I am firmly of the opinion that the Macintosh is Catholic and that DOS is Protestant. Indeed, the Macintosh is counter-reformist and has been influenced by the Ratio Studiorum of the Jesuits. It is cheerful, friendly, conciliatory. It tells the faithful how they must proceed step by step to reach, if not the kingdom of heaven, then the moment in which their document is printed. It is catechistic. The essence of revelation is dealt with by a simple formula and sumptuous icons. Everyone has a right to salvation. DOS is Protestant or even Calvinistic. It allows free interpretation of Scripture, demands difficult personal decisions, imposes a subtle hermeneutics upon the user, and takes for granted the idea that not all can reach salvation. To make the system work, you need to interpret the program yourself. A long way from the Baroque community of revelers, the user is closed within loneliness of his own inner torment. You may object that, with the passage to Windows, the DOS universe has come to resemble more closely the counter-reformist tolerance of the Macintosh. It's true. Windows represents an Anglican-style schism. Big ceremonies in the cathedral, there's always the possibility of a return to DOS that change things in accordance with bizarre decisions. And machine code, which lies beneath both systems, or environments if you prefer, that is to do with the Old Testament and is Talmudic and Kabbalistic.
That is funny.
I thought it's a great article.
It's
He
true,
goes
though,
on and on, but it's a lot of fun.
People that like Mac like it because it's very cohesive. Everything's all together. If you need spreadsheets, it works very well with your word processor and your music program. It all functions really well together and all that. But you can't go out and look for a better program. There's what Apple has for you.
Yeah.
Whereas with
Jerry Pournelle,
PCs,
Jerry Pournelle, the science fiction author, made the comment once. He used to write for Byte magazine, which was a computer magazine, relatively BYTE, relatively technical and oriented.
It's not a vampire magazine.
It doesn't exist anymore, sadly. But anyway, he wrote a column every month for them, and one of the things he said was that. With Apple, things are either really easy or absolutely impossible.
Yep.
Those are your options. It's either easy or you can't do it.
Yeah. And well, the thing is with PCs in this context, everything is very individual.
Yes.
You've got Word, which incorporates your slide, PowerPoint and all that stuff. But anything else you bring in, like our school is a PC school, so we have all these programs that we use to teach the kids.
They don't always work well together.
They don't. And with distance learning especially, we're finding out all the kinks in the hose. But for example, WebEx is a relatively recently developed meeting program by Microsoft. And we used WebEx initially because Zoom didn't have all the safety features in it for children and all the privacy things that we have to adhere to as schools. There's a privacy law similar to HIPAA that is for families in elementary school or in schools. So anyway, so we had to use WebEx at first. So it has so many issues, and they update things, but then as they're updating things, they're like
breaking other
things or giving the kids privileges they shouldn't have, like reactions. Right now we have holiday reactions, which is like there's a Santa thumbs up, a Santa thumbs down. There's a champagne bottle. I told the kids it's Martinelli's, but like we're not allowed to do anything that promotes like drinking alcohol with children. And so we've got the champagne bottle that pops. They finally gave us the ability to take that away from them. But at first in my meetings, if I took it away, I only took it away from myself. So it was really poorly done. But anyway, it conflicts with other programs that you have, and it uses a lot of resources, so you can't use some of the other stuff that you might want to use. And so you have to kind of decide. So there is a lot more friction in the individualistic thing than there are in the collectivist. And I think that is, when you think in terms of modern things, like a lot of the groups that are coming up that are the more kind of Marxist groups and things like that, the socialism stuff, it's like there's less conflict when you are collectivist. But it's not really accurate. Like you said, with Apple, it's either easy or it's impossible.
Right.
And the same thing with collectivism.
Yeah, well, see, the problem with one of the aspects of individualistic societies is, the low power distance. And this is defined to be the degree to which unequal distribution of power is accepted in a culture. Low power distance cultures challenge authority, encourage a reduction of power differences between management and employees, and encourage the use of power legitimately. Low power distance is more likely to occur in an individualistic culture, because in a collectivist culture, people protect the well-being of the group and the established order so that they would be less likely to challenge authority or people in power. And so that's one of the different, that is, individualistic societies are going to be much more dynamic. You'll have much more shifting of who's winning or losing, who's in power, who's not.
You also have a lot more progress in
progress will be more,
individualistic societies.
Collectivist societies tend to stagnate because change is not encouraged at all. That is, everything is supposed to stay the same. That is, you have your place and there you are. Bureaucracies are collectivist in that sense, which is why I say that any civilization is on a spectrum, that is, there are aspects of every civilization that are both individualistic and collectivist. Obviously, being a member of an individualistic society, I am more comfortable with that. I learned very young to challenge authority because I found authority figures were no brighter than I was, and sometimes I was brighter than them, so why should I pay attention to them? So I've told the stories before about my experience with teachers in kindergarten. So a range of different things that, I learned very quickly that, okay, just because you're in a position of authority doesn't mean that you know anything. Challenging authority is a useful thing, I think. But collectivist societies frown on that because the nature of a collectivist society is stay in your place, don't rock the boat. What's important is what's good for all of us as a whole, not what's necessarily good for you as the individual.
Right.
And, there are advantages to both sets of doing things. That is, the advantage of a collectivist society is that they tend to be very calm and peaceful, and nothing is out of place, and everything
Until
goes...
an individualist society comes by and says, we want your land,
Yeah.
or we want the stuff you have.
Or another collectivist society comes and wants
Yes.
to take your stuff. Or some crisis happens that disrupts things. And then a collectivist society is going to have trouble handling the disruption.
Well, a really good example is with Operation Warp Speed. Because there were so many regulations. When those regulations were removed and they were told, get us a vaccine, things went a lot more quickly.
What's interesting, I was reading this article, I posted it to my Facebook page, that the vaccine that is available now, finally, actually was ready by beginning of January.
Right. Well, it wasn't ready to go out, though.
No, it hadn't been tested or anything like that.
Right.
But so far as them
But they had
having,
one.
they had figured out what the problem was, they had come up with a solution, and that needed to be tested.
Right. And that was
So
really
it was
what
really
was...
fast. And
right.
what was encouraging, and the reason I posted the article was not that, because you have to do the testing. You can't just, oh, well, this seems to work, let's go try it out the population as a whole. No, that's a bad idea.
Arsenic seems to solve the problem. Let's everybody take arsenic and
Yes.
see how that goes. Nobody died of COVID. They all died of arsenic
But
poisoning.
what I found encouraging in the article was, one, figuring out ways to speed up the process of doing the testing, and also that certain parts of the testing we may not have to do anymore, the phase 1 trials.
Oh, really?
Because we understand things so much better now. That's part of the reason they were able to do it so quickly. Because there's only so many different types of viruses, and we have a sense of what will work with. This is how we do the flu virus each year, as quickly as we do.
Okay.
Is because we understand.
About that.
Yeah, because we know what it is, we know what the possible changes are, and so you guess as to what's likely to be the major thing, because we know what we need to do to make it stop. And so the effectiveness aspect of it is kind of baked in already. And so now it's just a matter of
Making sure it's safe.
making sure it's safe.
Right.
So there's, and even some levels of that. So it's just, I found the article interesting just because of our increased knowledge and understanding of these things. Some of the difficulties in creating new vaccines have been removed.
Right.
And so some of the testing we do is kind of redundant because we already know that based on all our experience and understanding to this point.
Right.
So I thought that was just really interesting and encouraging.
Well, and two, it kind of ends up being a competition too, like who can get theirs out first.
Yeah.
So then it's even faster, but they have to, making sure it's safe is really part of the formula, because no company wants to go out of business because they injured a bunch of people by being sloppy.
Right.
So
yeah, you don't tend to stay in business long if your
right.
Clients are dying.
Right. Exactly.
You get sued, you lose money. It's just not good for business at all.
Yeah. But then there's a collectivist nature to it too, because a lot of companies had to come together and work together to make deploying it happen. I was watching a thing on the news about the some hospitals have gone ahead and bought their own freezers and things like that, but they've got airlines that have agreed to do the shipping, because it's like it has to be like within a certain amount of time because of keeping them frozen. But then from the time it thaws, you only have 6 hours to get the vaccine out, and each bottle holds of this one particular vaccine holds like 5 doses. So you have to, within 6 hours, dose 5 people. So anyway, so it's really kind of fascinating to find out that the fact that we've been like wasting all of this time getting helpful medicines out, when like we've learned so much from this experience, that I get that it wasn't really a waste of time because we didn't know as much.
We didn't know.
But it's kind of like
you know better, you do better.
Right. When you know better, you do better. But like when cars first came out, it's like, well, my horse is much safer. I know it's slower, but then you realize, okay, I can get places a lot faster in a car. And so it's just a matter of learning those new things and being okay with it. That's part of it,
people always fear what's new.
Right.
And collectivist societies will be more resistant to the changes brought on by new things happening. But collectivism is useful in the sense that you do want to care about people besides just yourself. That is, individualism carried to an extreme, you end up being entirely selfish, and that can be psychotic. So you don't want to get to that point. But on the other hand, collectivist societies are not able to adjust to changes, and they stifle change, and they stifle innovations in individuals. It is challenging authority is a useful thing. And so individualism is not bad. And it's interesting from a historical standpoint to see societies that made shifts from more collectivistic approaches to more individualistic approaches. One of the things, this challenging of authority, and also the idea of reducing the amount of hierarchical differences. In most of the ancient Near East, looking in terms of biblical materials, in most of the ancient Near East, the king was a law unto himself. That is, what he said is what happened. There were attempts that were always made to try to somehow limit what kings could do. So, for instance, the Medes and Persians, what they came up with was that once the king had made a law, it couldn't be undone.
A law of the Medes and the Persians.
Right, and the idea of that was it would limit the level of capriciousness, as he couldn't just today make this law and this way, and then tomorrow he changes his mind and do it. And so you never know what the rules are. And that's a very bad way of handling a society. Israelite society is unique in that they made their king subject to the laws of the country. See, in most countries, the king was above the law. That is, whatever the king wanted, the king got. In Israelite society, the king, very explicitly, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 17, where it lays out what the rules of the king was, one of the statements says he should not think of himself as better than his brother Israelites. And one of the things he had to do was to make a copy of the law. That is what you see in the book of Deuteronomy, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. The five books
Slow
of
down.
Pentateuch. Yeah, slow
You're
down.
talking really fast.
He had to make a copy of that for himself so that he would know what he could and couldn't do and how to take care of the people in the country.
Well, I have
And you
said,
see that reflected even in a bad king like Ahab, who, he decided he wanted to buy somebody's property. And so he approached him and asked, "Can I buy the property?" The man said no. And so he went away sad because he wasn't going to get it then. His wife, who came from a more collectivist culture, said, "What's the matter with you? Here, I'll take care of it." And she went and stole it from him. Because that's the way it worked outside of Israel. So that was a significant innovation that is more individualistic in its orientation than collectivist.
well, I've often said that I think that from the time that United States president is elected up until the inauguration in January, that the president, part of what the president should have to do is sit down and by hand write out the Constitution. Like, just take a section a day and write it out.
It wouldn't take that long.
It wouldn't, but
It's
well,
not shorter than writing Genesis through Deuteronomy out by your
but
by hand.
but you have a shorter length of time, just to remind them that we do have a Constitution and that is the law of our land, and that we have certain that
all the other
people
laws
have
are
rights.
commentary on it.
Right, exactly. But I've often thought that would be a good exercise for the
bad thing.
president. It's like, well, the
Also,
president-elect,
the members of Congress and
they should all do it, really.
anybody involved in government at any level.
But I think
probably-
too, it's important to recognize that even within an individualistic society, you have to have some collectivist aspects. Like,
Right. That's why I say it's a continuum.
right. So, like your police force and your fire department are paid for with public funds, and they're kind of collectivist in the sense that they all function the same way. But you need that. Now, there are areas though that have
Actually, any organization will tend towards a certain amount of collectivism. That is, whether it's the Lions Club or Congress or any or business, the organization is going to be somewhat collectivist in its orientation.
right. But there are certain things in a society that you need to have that are collectivist, because you need like them to kind of do, like, you don't want a fire station that goes out and randomly fights fires like any old way they want. There's
Well,
like
the other
ways to
thing
do it,
is
the training and the hierarchy
Yeah, well, see,
involved.
collectivism, the positive aspect of it is that you were looking out for people beside yourself, because you realize, like John Donne's poem, no man is an island. That is, we do impact one another, and so there are certain things that we do need to think in terms of how does this affect other people.
And there are some
It's not
things we
just all
do
about
better
you.
together than individually.
Right.
So,
And so both of these things, that is, these are the two, it's like two wings on a bird. You need to have both of them. Although that's a bad analogy, because I would argue that individualism needs to be a little bit more heavily emphasized than the collectivist
Right.
aspect of things, just because individualism, again, is more innovative and better able to handle the unexpected.
well, you can have collectivism within an individualistic society,
Well,
but you
that's-
can't, hold on, you can't have individualism within a collectivist society.
Right, that generally tends to be
And
the case.
so one tends to exclude the other in that.
Yeah, if you look at totalitarian forms of government, whether it's on the left or the right, communism versus Nazism, they are very much collectivist societies, and
they don't work that well. Oops, I didn't reset the timer, but nobody said anything either, so. So I'm kind of guessing the impetus for this topic was what we're doing in Sunday school? Was that what got you going on this?
You had mentioned that,
Yeah.
and so I thought, well, this would be interesting to talk about. Because it's the case that the societies, as we see them in the Bible, are going to be more collectivist than what modern English-speaking societies are. That is, they are not like us. Is we're definitely, when you walk into the Bible, you're walking into an alien world, particularly if you're coming from the modern West, and particularly if you're coming from the English-speaking world. We're a bunch of radical individualists, and we don't fit into those societies, whether it's the Roman society, Greek society, or ancient Israelite society. We're just not that kind of people. We don't function that way.
Would you say that...
And so we're not going to always understand what's going on in those places because we'll tend to read... It's like if you go to a foreign country and you see somebody doing something, you may try to interpret what they're doing based on your own experience back in your homeland. And you are likely to completely misunderstand what's happening.
Right. Okay, so I have a question for you. So, societies develop over time.
Yes.
So, would you say that in the early stages of a society, like in the ancient times, thinking in terms of like an evolutionary type thing, that collectivist societies are really important when survival is your thing.
Right.
Like, think about the Indian tribes in the United States and African tribes in the different countries in Africa, and the ancient Near East and things like that. So when it comes to surviving, we will all survive if we work together.
Exactly.
Kind of like, well...
Civilization by its nature is collectivist.
Right.
That is, you by yourself are not likely to survive very well.
Right.
That is, you are not able to do much. That is, you're limited in your knowledge base. Most of us would not be able to build a pencil on our own, let alone do all our plumbing, electrical work, let alone refine the metals to get the things that we need for the electric and build a power generating plant. I mean, we have to work together. That is, the nature of civilization is collectivistic because we have distributed what people know. That is, this person knows that, this person knows this person knows the other. Together we create this thing.
Right.
Same thing with the business. As Elon Musk, as brilliant as he is not out there actually building the cars himself. He does not build the rocket. He doesn't go into the backyard. Although looking at Boca Chica, where they build Starship, it comes close to being a backyard. But still, you've got a bunch of specialists that are doing these things that he has brought together to work together to create this thing.
But would you say that starting out as a collectivist society from the survival part, once you've kind of established your society, that really in order to advance as a society, you have to have individualism. Okay.
Yeah, it cannot be purely collectivistic any more than you can be purely individualistic.
Right.
It is pure individualism means that you're starving by yourself over in that field there.
Which the group of people that are barbecuing are like, oh wow.
But agriculture is a collectivist sort of thing. That is, you've gotten together and you have determined that you're going to do this thing, and you find a way, instead of just going out and trying to find stuff to eat, you change your environment and work together to create this system that allows you to grow more food than otherwise you'd be able to get.
Right.
And so the population then can grow. The Industrial Revolution that happened in the 1800s radically altered the nature of world civilization because essentially we went from, it essentially does for manufacturing what agriculture did for farming or for finding food. As we went from hunter-gatherers to agriculture and increased the population as a consequence of that. The Industrial Revolution did the same thing, and has allowed for a rapid increase in population, but far more food, material, wealth than what we would have otherwise had. That is, before 1800, even making allowances for inflation, most human beings lived on about $2 a day, which means that you weren't starving to death.
Right.
That is, you would have food and you'd be able to live to the next day. If you were making less than $2 a day, it meant you were starving. 90% of the human population in 1800 lived that way. Today, it's $40 a day average for the human population. So we're way above absolute poverty. And in fact, those that live in abject poverty, that is at the $2 level, it's down below 10% now. And by the end of this decade, it should be 0%. Everybody will be above that level now. And that's primarily thanks to the Industrial Revolution. So, anyway. Let's see, individualistic cultures tend to prioritize the individual person over the group, and this can be seen in how they display how the display rules vary from a collectivist culture compared to an individualistic culture. Display rules are the rules that exist in different cultures that determine how emotion should be displayed publicly. In individualistic cultures, self-expression is very highly valued, making the display rules less strict and allowing people to display intense emotions such as happiness, anger, love, and so on. While in a collectivist culture, moderation and self-control is highly valued for the well-being of the group. And collectivist cultures therefore tend to restrain from showing emotion in public.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a difference that you wouldn't normally think about. But
You should get a drink of your coffee. Your voice is getting
a little rough.
gravelly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I just finished this study that was 2 weeks long, and it was about misreading scripture with Western eyes.
Right.
And they talked about, the first week they talked about, I have so much trouble with these words. They've all gone out of my head.
Uh-oh. I'll come up with words that are similar.
There's the one about being brought into the family.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the client one. Oh my gosh, I hate being old.
Well, there's kinship.
Yes, kinship. The one that begins with the P.
Patronage.
Yeah, patronage. And do you know them? Just say them if you know them
I'm
instead
trying
of
to remember.
struggling.
No,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
trying to remember them.
Okay,
If you
I'm like,
give me little hints,
okay.
then I can start.
And then there's the third one. I can't remember what it is, but when I talk about something else, I remember it. Anyway,
Okay.
and then they talked about shame.
Right.
So that last week was about shame.
Yeah.
And when, like, we hear cultures like in like Chinese culture, like you bring shame on your family if you've done something. Well, what's interesting is,
Which is more collectivist orientation.
right, this person that wrote the book, he was a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and there was a tribe there that he was working with that one of the girls had gotten pregnant outside of being married. And at this thing that they were doing, this community event, I forget if it was a meal or if it was a celebration or what it was. Anyway, the leader of the community said that she has brought shame on the community. And so for us, it would be like, well, that's a horrible thing to say. But what they mean by shame is a way back for her to come back into the community, and basically saying, this is a shame on our community. Now this child belongs to all of us. So they're not just throwing the child out in the woods and letting the animals eat it. Because this is a shame, they are, by telling her this is a shame, they're actually bringing her back into the group, and they're going to help her raise this child. And I had never heard that before. And you read things in the Bible that you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm glad they don't do that anymore. But we're not understanding it the way that it was
worked in that
right, that it worked in that civilization. Because if I was there, say as an American tourist, and I was there, and the leader stood up and said, you know, she's shameful because she had this baby, I would be like, I'll adopt it. You know, like we feel really awkward as Americans just shaming some, because, you know, like fat shaming, body shaming, you know, those kinds of things are like a big thing right now. Like you just don't do that. But that's basically what they did. But it wasn't like, okay, she's a bad person and we have to put her out now. This is a way for her to be brought back in to the group.
Yeah. Well, it illustrates to some extent the difference in communication style, which I talked about at the beginning, is what individualistic societies are low context communication style, which means that context is not necessary not as much context is necessary in order to avoid misunderstanding and miscommunication. It is, we're more direct, and the words just mean what they mean, and there's no underlying context involved. You don't have to know that much about our culture in order to get what we're saying. There's a certain amount of that, particularly with idioms, but things like shame, what we would understand at meaning versus the context of that culture, what they indicate with it, entirely different sort of thing.
Right.
That is, there is less necessity to read between the lines in the low context individualistic society. In a collectivist society, reading between the lines is part of what's necessary. That you've got to understand all that's involved in order to figure out what's going on.
Right.
So it's just an entirely different way of doing things. Now, again, in individualistic societies, that still happens. I mean, you have jargon that will be part of an in-group. And so, for instance, if you work in aerospace, there will be acronyms and all sorts of things that you'll say.
Oh, in education. It's so bad.
Yeah, because it's part of the in-group. And the in-groups tend to be collectivistic. And so you have your own language that somebody on the outside has no clue what you're actually saying. That's not the reason the language exists, though. The language existing that way is not designed to keep outsiders out. It does do that, but the reason for the in-group communication style is because it simplifies communication for the group.
Right.
Rather than having to explain a bunch of stuff, you just say this and everybody gets it.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because
it's like a inside joke.
Right. When we do IEP meetings, individualized education plan meetings, students that have, now I'm going to give you the context for it so you can be part of the in-group. So students that have a learning disability or some health impairment that requires them to have this legal document with accommodations and goals and things like that. In order to do that, we have to have a meeting, and we have to have a meeting every year, and then every 3 years they do they retest the student and bring back, you know, like you'll adjust the goals at the annual, but then at the triennial you'll redo everything. Anyway, so when we have our IEP meetings now, part of our agenda is to say that we're going to speak clearly. So if anybody doesn't understand what we're talking about, that they can ask, that we encourage them to ask questions, because you've got parents there that aren't in the business. And so, you know, we're talking about IEPs and SSTs and RSP and, you know, and all this stuff, and Woodcock-Johnson and, you know, and all these terms and acronyms and stuff that the parent can get lost in the alphabet soup pretty quickly. And so we emphasize that if we say something you don't, because you get all in your head and you're like, oh yes, this blah blah blah, and you forget
Because
that you have someone
so
that doesn't
well.
speak the language in the room. And especially now, since we're doing things virtually, some of the parents have to call in because they don't have the technology to do like a Zoom meeting, or they don't like they don't want to download the app onto their phone because they don't have enough room or data on their phone, so they'll just call in. So then you've got a person who doesn't have a face, who is the parent, And so when you don't have a face to interact with, that makes it more outsiderish. Even though at our school, we're super inclusive. We really encourage the parent to talk, and we purposely give the parent a platform, I was going to say podium, platform to speak from. Like we say to them, what is your child's strengths? What are your concerns? We definitely give them their chance to speak. But as professionals, we all get in our own heads and we're all like, rattling off these things. And it's hard to remember that this rectangle on the screen is a person who loves the person that we're talking about, loves this person more than I ever could as the teacher, because I only have them for 180 days, and knows more about this child than I can ever know because I only have them for 180 days. And, but they're right now a blank rectangle on a screen. And you have to keep reminding yourself that this is a foreigner in our land, and we have to translate for this person. And we have to give them the ability to ask questions. And it may seem like a really dumb question, not like, oh, you're so stupid, just like, well, that's like really dumb. It's
It's
like
obvious.
that's super, it's obvious. Yeah. There's an obvious answer to it. And
But it's not obvious to somebody on the
yeah.
outside.
And
It's
when
not
you
part of the
hear the
collective.
question, right, when you hear the question, you're like, oh, okay. So you take a step back for a minute and you think, like, everybody will get really quiet. And then the person usually who's running the meeting will answer the question, or if it pertains to someone's specialty that's in the meeting, they'll defer to that person and have them explain. But it's a little bit like having ice water flicked on your face when you're in a warm room. Like, ooh, okay, yeah, we were talking, above people's heads. So, yeah, we run into that in education a lot. So, and when you talk to a doctor about stuff, you talk to like some surgeons and stuff. They're like, or doctors with specialties, they're kind of notorious for speaking their own language, and you don't know what they mean. And computer people. My lab tech came in and he started talking, and I know a decent amount about computers, but networking I really don't know much about. And so he starts talking in this lingo, and I looked at him and he goes, what did he say to me? I don't know. Anyway, it was some term he used. I'm like, yeah, you're like talking to your own self, because I have no idea what you mean. So he goes, I'll just stop, because it wasn't important that I knew it.
Yeah.
He was just talking.
It was interesting to him, and he was just...
Yeah. And
And
then
he forgot that he was with somebody that has no clue what he's talking about and really doesn't care.
So I was going to let him go on.
She experiences that a lot from me.
I'm used
go
to
on
it.
about stupid things.
I
that
smile and nod.
Yeah, and hope that I'll stop long enough for her to slip away.
Escape the bonds of the...
Yes. But that's one of the difficulties of collectivism, is that you, by nature, you have in-groups and out-groups. And that can be dangerous, actually, if the in-group starts thinking of itself as better than the out-group because they're the in-group. That is, some conflicts happen as a consequence of that sort of thing, where we have this better knowledge than you do. And you see that in many different places. You'll see it in religion, you'll see it in politics, you'll see it, people view themselves as elite because they're part of a certain in-group. And that's an error. Again, in an individualistic society where individualism is emphasized, it doesn't matter, who are you, is the attitude. So what? That doesn't make you better because you happen to have this particular knowledge.
Right.
Because all of us have knowledge that other people don't have.
Right.
Which again is the nature of a civilization, because otherwise, by yourself you could do everything. Well, by yourself you'll starve to death. So again, we need both collectivism and individualism to have a properly functioning society. And part of the nature of history is watching how that plays out, going back and forth, and what societies do well versus those that don't. And a collectivist society can last for a very long time. One of the longest lasting civilizations was Egypt. And it was very much a collectivist civilization, where everybody knew their place in the hierarchy, and that's where you stayed. Unless something extraordinary happened that would bump you up.
Even in death, because their
Yes,
tombs.
even in death.
Yeah, I was watching a documentary on Netflix about the tomb of Saqqara, I think it was. His name was, and they were determining his station in life based upon his tomb. And then there was some question about the fact that the guy that was actually buried there may have stolen the tomb from a family member, based on some information that they found within the tomb. They didn't expand on it a whole lot. But one thing that was funny in there, it kind of doesn't really pertain to this discussion, but because it's here, the lady that was interpreting the walls, she was, she and another guy were going through the hieroglyphics and stuff on the walls. She explained that, she said, this isn't a history of his life. This is what he expects to have in the afterlife. So the drawings and stuff on the walls is what they expect to have in the afterlife. She said it's not his Facebook, which I thought was funny because she was Muslim. She had a head covering on, and she was in there, doing ancient tomb things, and it's like you wouldn't think of Facebook as far as an ancient tomb thing. But yeah, so their tombs are not their Facebook. It's what they expected to get in the afterlife.
And the reason that Egypt was able to survive and keep the same culture for as long as they did is largely because Egypt was very isolated. That is, they were surrounded by desert on 3 sides and the Mediterranean on the north. And so they didn't have a whole lot. And it was hard for invaders. The only invaders they had to really worry about were from Mesopotamia. There was only a very narrow place they could get down into Egypt from there. They had to go down through Palestine and then in that way. And so if you could block that off, nobody could bother you much. And it wasn't until Alexander the Great and then the Romans that kind of undid their civilization. But for 3,000-4,000 years, they were able to survive pretty much with nobody bothering them, and so they just continued as they were. Chinese civilization was that way as well. They were pretty isolated out there by themselves, and a lot of mountains and things to protect them. And so again, their society just kind of went on as it always had. Japanese society did not change a whole lot until Europeans showed up. They adapted very well, though. They decided, hey, we need to incorporate these things into our culture, which was a remarkable thing for them to do that. But I think they had some individualistic elements in their society. That is, you look at the, ninja is the word that's not the right one, but
samurai?
Yes, the samurai.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure where you were going, so I just thought I'd throw some Japanese words out there.
Aspects of their society that viewed heroes as being something that there were some elements of individualism that seemed to be part of that I think is why they were able to make why they were able to adapt as well as they did. Although they're still very much a collectivistic society. Even today, even with the trappings of Western civilization tacked on, fundamentally they're much more collectivistic than what the Western world is. So, and modern day China, despite their acceptance of a lot of modern technology, is still very collectivistic in its orientation. And that's one of their weaknesses, actually. Innovation is not something China is all that good at this point because it's not prized to the same extent that it is in the West.
Right. And everything goes back to your ancestors and to your family.
And your family into the country as the whole. It is larger and larger groups is what you're concerned with.
And even their news is controlled by the government
Yes.
and things like that. So you can't even really trust their news.
Yeah, that's again part of collectivistic nature of a society. That is, you have to do what's good for the group as a whole. And what's good for the group as a whole isn't necessarily what's true. That is, you don't think in terms of truth versus falsity, you think in terms of good for the group or not good for the group. Which is different than an individualistic society, where we tend to prize truth over falsity simply because we view truth as being all important, regardless of whether it makes the group happier.
Right. And then there's a lot of secrecy too. When collectivist societies kind of turn to the dark side, that's when you get a lot of the secrecy, like with North Korea. We know very little about North Korea except what we can see from satellites, and I think that South Korea has some abilities to see over the border in places.
Well, they have the same language, that makes it easier for them in that regard.
But
yeah, it's
the secrecy is bad.
Yeah, but that's the nature again of any totalitarian regime.
Right.
Whether it's left or right, just the nature of that kind of society. The Nazism and communism are extreme forms of totalitarian societies. I mean, ancient Egyptian society was totalitarian, not to the same level, but they controlled what went out. So if a ruler or somebody in the country that was important did something that was not good for the whole, they were erased from. They were canceled.
Oh, that was another thing they talked about in that thing, is that they had found tombs where stuff was rubbed off. And so
That's exactly what they
like
would
that
do.
would be like going to somebody's grave and rubbing the words off of their tombstone, so you don't know who they are anymore.
Exactly. Well, the only reason we know, probably most people have heard at least the phrase, the heretic king, Akhenaten. He was King Tut's father. The only reason we know about Akhenaten is because when they canceled him, they abandoned the new capital city that he had created, and it was swallowed by the desert and then dug up by archaeologists. But so far as any of the official records of that period of time, his name was eliminated. He disappeared from history. But thanks to the fact that they just let the desert swallow up his capital city, we've got all the records now. And so we know about him and what he did.
Like if they had burned it or something, that would...
We might never know that he even existed, which was their goal. And Soviet Union, Nazi Germany would do the same sort of thing. I mean, if some individual fell out of favor in the Soviet Union, you'd have this old photograph that shows him in it, and then the new photograph, he's not there. And they would send out pages, they had the Soviet encyclopedia, and libraries would get a new page where they were supposed to cut out the old page and put this one in its place because things had changed. Somebody was no longer...
Canceling people is an indication that a group is going over to the dark side.
Yes.
So you need to avoid that at all costs.
Yep. Okay.
So,
well,
we're about done.
Yeah, we're about done. We didn't get a whole lot of questions.
We didn't, but we had some new listeners. My friend June said hello, and Stephanie said hello. June is still here. I'm not sure. Sometimes people are here, but I don't see their bubbles. Oh, yeah, and then Ryan's here too. So welcome, guys. So hopefully you'll join us again. Next Saturday, we're not sure if we're going to be airing.
Will.
We probably will, but we'll see. So join the Mirror Darkly Facebook page or the YouTube channel so that you get notifications about whether we're going live or not. So we'll have to see. Anyway. So also, if you are interested we're starting this study in Sunday school called Misreading Scripture through Western eyes. If you're interested in that, you can get the book on Amazon. We're going to discuss the introduction tomorrow. And if you go to the Quartz Hill Community Church Facebook page, you'll find the Zoom link and password for Sunday. The password is in the comments, because at first when we were using it, it did need a password, and then they passworded everything. So the password is in the comments. But anyway, you can join us for Sunday school if you want at 10 a.m. Pacific time. At 11 a.m. Pacific time, we live stream our church services on Facebook and YouTube. The church, Quartz Hill Community Church, has its own YouTube channel and has its own Facebook page. So you can go over to there and set yourself up with notifications, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. So that you have that set up if you want to join us. So if you are in the Antelope Valley and you want to join us in person, we are socially distanced. We do wear masks. If you are comfortable with meeting in person, we are here at, like I said, 10 a.m. for Sunday school, 11 a.m. for church. So
next week's topic, assuming that I am up to it, is the world is not going to hell in a handbasket.
Okay. So I didn't know that's how you got to hell, was in a handbasket, but there we go.
There you go. It's an idiom.
Yeah, I know, I was kidding. So anyway, so we got a couple comments, great conversation, and good show.
Okay.
So thanks, guys. So we'll see you next week. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, as Miss Aileen would say.